Hello, this is Dr. Heather Lee, and this is a continuation of a discussion about differentiation in the classroom. And we've been talking about a model of differentiation by Carol Ann Tomlinson. And in the previous video, we talked about principles of differentiated instruction and a definition. And in this video, we'll talk about how teachers can differentiate content, process, and product based on students' readiness, interests, and learning profiles. And this page that you see here, hopefully you have downloaded it or printed it off and using it to take some notes. This is page 2 of that document. And in this section, you'll be filling in a definition under each of these words: content, process, product, and then down below, readiness, interests, and learning profiles. And as we do this, I want you to be thinking about the lesson plans that you're creating, about the unit plan that you're creating, because this can give you some ideas of how you can include differentiation. Beginning this week, in all of your lesson plans, you'll need to give an example of how you are planning in advance to differentiate, to offer different ways of learning that same material based on your students and their needs. All right? Now, there is a difference between just doing different things. Like, for example, one day I'll do a video, one day I'll do a lecture, one day I'll do something that involves acting things out. That's not true differentiation, because everybody is still doing the same thing. It's when in your classroom students have the choice or are assigned different things based on their needs that we can say you're differentiating. So it's not one size fits all, it's the teacher offering different ways to meet the same objective. So let's talk about some ways to do that. First, we can differentiate 3 types of things. The first one is the content. The content, and you can write this in the box underneath, is what is being taught or learned. This is the what. And we talked before about focusing on the key concepts. And in this content area, if you differentiate content, you might vary the curriculum and the materials that are used for your students. And you could do that by offering different reading levels of instruction. Maybe you have a student who is learning English, and you offer them an article in their native language that they can read. That's offering a different type of reading to them. Maybe you use different texts, computer, video option, or other media to convey information. So some students might listen to a lecture, but other students may watch a video, or other students may listen to a lecture in a different type of setting. Some might just read. Another way to differentiate your content is to have some material that is more in-depth and some that's more basic. This is when you're taking students' readiness levels into account, and so we'll talk about that a little later. And the example I mentioned before, offering things in a student's native language. So you can adjust the curriculum and materials that you use. Now, students are still learning and focusing on the same key concepts, but what they do with those concepts might be different, and the way that they learn it might be different. Okay. Now, the process, I just mentioned the way they do it. Process are the activities, the instructional activities that you use, that students use to learn content. This is the things that you do in the classroom. So one way to differentiate it in this area is to provide options for how students want to learn, or how they might learn best, based on their readiness, their interests, and their learning profiles. So you offer them different ways to do different things. Maybe doing something, down here there's an example, group work versus individual work. And you could give students that they make the decision whether they're going to work alone, with one other person, or maybe in a small group. You can also differentiate this process by having some groups that you know they're stronger and they need much less from you as a teacher. So you don't give them too much support. We call that little teacher support. And they do a lot of things independently, versus other students or a group of students who you know need more support. It's a project and they need to check in with you every day about how they're coming, or maybe every week. Whereas other students, really, you could check in with them one time a week before the project is due, and you pretty much can be guaranteed that they're on the right track in doing it. So a lot of teacher support, little teacher support. Another thing you can do for the process is, these are a few examples of literally thousands, but you could offer some organizers for them in taking notes to help them follow along with a presentation maybe that they're watching on the computer, or that they're a lecture that they're listening to. So you can offer things. Not everybody needs to use it, or you could just provide it for one or two people that you feel really should use it, and then maybe keep it in a certain place, and you help them with accountability. So we can vary our content, our process, and then finally the product. The definition of product is how students show their learning. This is usually at the end with your summative assessment. It doesn't have to be, but it often is at the end. So you can offer your students options in assessment. For example, they could do different types of assessment, like a poster, an essay, a role play, a PowerPoint, portfolio. And again, this is not saying that for one unit, I'll have them do a poster. For another unit, they'll take a test. For another unit, they'll do a report. All teachers do that. We kind of mix it up. But differentiation is when you say, okay, to show your learning at the end of this unit, you're going to have a choice of 4 ways to do it. And so you have clearly laid out a poster option and what the criteria are, a test option, a report option, all those things. You could also have students help design their end products. Maybe for a very strong student, you could allow them to take a poster idea, and you could ask them to add 3 more criteria and have them involved in showing what they know and what they have learned. You also could have varying degrees of difficulty for an end product, and to make something more challenging, or to make something really just focus on the basic criteria that have to be met. And they could use various resources to prepare products. You could maybe gather together 10 different types of resources that students could use, and then it's their choice which one they use. So those are examples of varying content, process, and product. But the whole reason you would vary those things are based on your students. So we differentiate those things based on students' readiness, interests, and learning profile. So the first one is readiness, and right down in this section here, readiness is the ability level or the prior knowledge of each student. Ability level or prior knowledge of each student. You see, everybody learns at a different rate, and some students can do things much faster than others. Others need to hear it again, need extra reinforcement. Or it could be that you're learning something that a student has much prior experience in. Maybe they transferred schools and the school was in a different state, and last year they studied this exact same thing. And maybe they're not even typically a strong student, but in this particular unit, they are. And it would be a waste of their time to just repeat the unit. So those are examples of different types of readiness. So you can do many things for them. You can adjust how difficult something is. You can give them a task that is very familiar. It's a situation they already know about. Maybe something in America, this country. Or you can make it much less familiar. Maybe in maybe a report or something involving a place that they have never been, something they don't have familiarity with, and it would make it a much more challenging experience for a stronger student. You could add or remove things like peer coaching, manipulatives, or models, giving them more or less support. You could use small group instruction, and you can allow students to go at a faster pace and to skip certain parts if they can prove that they have already mastered it. So student readiness is one thing that we should keep in mind. Another one is students' interests. And I would just write in this block, what would they choose? And choice is a key word in differentiation. Ask yourself, what can I do to allow my students to have a choice? And so as we teachers are thinking about differentiation according to students' interests, we of course want to know what their interests are. So make sure there's a time when you learn about your students and what appeals to them and how they like to learn. You can allow them to choose part of an aspect of a topic that they're going to learn about or that they're going to present about. You could offer a wide range of materials and technology. allow them choices of the task, choices of the product, encourage further investigation in something that they're interested in. This is one of the most simple and obvious things that we can do. So we could vary by readiness, by interest, but also by learning profile. And this is what we have been talking about this week in our class, and learning different learning styles. We've talked about visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. So you might offer a visual way to study something or a kinesthetic way to do something. You might also vary things by multiple intelligences. You could have a musical way to do something, and then a more kinesthetic or something involving nature to involve a wider range of intelligences. You might let them work alone or work with a peer, and then also you might give them choices in their environment, whether they have to sit at a desk or whether there's maybe a more comfortable way that they can learn. Study sessions that are quiet or that are have some music in the background. There are a variety of things that you can do to let students learn based on their own learning profile. So let me give you a couple of examples of how a teacher might differentiate. I'm thinking specifically of your lesson plans and the section where you have to write about how you're going to add differentiation. And your differentiation, the way you word it, could be as simple as this. You could say, in this lesson, I differentiated the product based on student interests. And the way that I did that is that I'm allowing my students to choose between two different options for to how to take their quiz. And I'm letting them do that based on their interest, whether they prefer to study X or Y. Okay, that's one example. Or you might say, in a different lesson or a different part, you could say, I'm going to differentiate the content of this lesson based on my students' readiness levels. I know that some of my students struggle in this area and do not have the right prior knowledge. So I am going to provide a small group training session that gives some background knowledge to just a few students. And we're going to talk about that, and it's these certain 3 students that I'm going to do because I know their readiness level is not quite the same. Okay, so that's an example. Another one is, in this lesson, I am going to study the process based on learning profile. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to allow my students to decide for themselves whether they want to watch a video that talks about this concept, or whether they would prefer to listen to me describe it in person. And so I'm giving a visual and an auditory way to learn this based on my students' learning profile. Okay? So really there are limitless options here. You need to think about those 3 areas: content, process, and product, and then think of their readiness, interest, and learning profiles. And you're going to offer different ways based on the needs of the students that you have in your classroom. And if you don't know of an actual student and an actual need, then you could make it up. You could say, for future students, or I know that I'll probably have some students who struggle, so this is what I could do in a lesson. Okay, so you're planning in advance that you know that your students are going to have differences in the way that they learn. So this ends the session on differentiation, and beginning this week, your lesson plans need to include an example of how you could differentiate in that lesson. All right, thank you very much.